And we believe that the fundamental problem then was that all the companies building out voice assistants were trying to follow this path of evolution from chatbots. And if you start from chatbots, which is technology, decades old, and try to somehow evolve it into true conversational AI, it's not possible. And I think we've seen that because if you look at how all the other assistants are now, how they were 3 years ago, most people would say that there's not been a major change, right?
Welcome back to another Tech Times exclusive. Today we'll be discussing MEETKAI. MEETKAI is the next gen conversational AI company. And to shed some light on, to let us know a little more about MEETKAI, we'll be talking with co-founder and CEO James Kaplan. James, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. Thanks, Chris. Really glad to be on and talk to you today.
Absolutely. So this is very exciting. I use my voice assistant. Actually, I probably talk to my phone more than I talk to other people, to be honest with you. So could you maybe, just tell us first about MEETKAI?
Sure. Thank you. So we founded our company in 2018, largely based on observation from sort of user evaluations of the iPhone. Mm-hmm. And the iPhone X came out then, and it was, a lot of people thought the iPhone X was the best iPhone, sort of really an amazing phone. And if you look at user satisfaction on that phone, every feature across the board, 80 and 90% of people report more than happy, calling, camera, notes, responsiveness, battery, performance, web browsing. And then at Siri, it was 15%. Ooh. And we saw that as wow, this kind of shows that even though at that point, Siri was 6 years old, basically, mm-hmm. They were still not innovating. And we believe that the fundamental problem then was that all the companies building out voice assistants were trying to follow this path of evolution from chatbots. And if you start from chatbots, which is technology, decades old, and try to somehow evolve it into true conversational AI, it's not possible. And I think we've seen that because if you look at how all the other assistants are now, how they were 3 years ago, most people would say that there's not been a major change, right? Mm-hmm. The performance has not been okay, they were bad then and they're great now, or they're bad then and they're average now. It's just they hit a ceiling. Right. And we founded the company with the idea that, okay, they've hit a ceiling. So what if we started from a different starting point, followed a different pathway? Could we maybe not immediately, but put ourselves on a path that would eventually leapfrog them and provide differentiated technology? And that's what we did. And it was pretty risky because, whenever you do a startup and you're not following a path, then it has the potential for failure, because it could be a path just down instead of up. Right. And you never know if the reason why companies haven't done that path before is because they haven't thought of it or they tried it and it failed. So it was a very risky endeavor when we started the company. But we did. So we started the company anyways, based on the idea that it's a gamble, it's a moonshot, as they say for startups. And we succeeded, actually. We found approaches that work to allow us to have conversational AI that I would say is on a different evolutionary path than the other assistants. And, while there's plenty of places where we're not good enough yet in terms of domain coverage, depth of a certain language, regional expertise, it's one of those things where we have a different pathway that doesn't have a ceiling. We're fairly confident that as time goes on, we can continuously evolve the technology, which is especially applicable for sort of our newer projects. Our voice assistant is just, one of the applications of our core IP. Our tech is also available in a few different companies that have leveraged us and our technology to do things around restaurant discovery, movie discovery, news search, all sorts of things like that using the same core blocks.
Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. And from my research, I see that you can actually conversational AI and please correct me if I'm wrong, but your company MEETKAI is the world's first.
That's what we like to say. The big difference is that it starts from the way you look at how you interact. Mm-hmm. And if you think about how we interact with, let's say, a search engine like Google, You do a request and then you see a list of results, right?
Mhm.
That's it. If you want to see a different list of results, you have to delete your search and start again. All these assistants out there plug into Google most of the time. So how can they have a conversation by using Google if like you can't have a conversation with Google directly?
Right.
So our approach was like that was sort of one of the fundamental observations we had of if you have a technology here and a technology here, and this technology is not conversational, then connecting them is not conversational. So we felt that we had to build everything ourselves. And while there's still, as I said, a long way for us to go, because we control the entire experience, like for movies, for example, we have the entire index of almost every movie. So it's easy for us to have a conversation about movies because we know the relationships between movies, information about movies, not just a list of 10 web pages that talk about them.
Right. So I have a question as far as I guess UI. So when, for example, a personal experience daily, I say something to my phone and it just comes back with like, I don't know, something that's not what I said. And I catch myself saying, no, not that. What I meant was, so does Kai actually, will it carry on a conversation like that? Like, oh, I'm sorry, maybe you meant this type thing.
Yeah, so the fundamental way that we've seen a lot of people use it successfully is in what I would call like a refinement-based session, where you say one thing, you don't like what you see, and you say something else to try to put it on the right path again.
Right.
Show me movies. And you see a movie, it's like, no, I really didn't want a romance movie, and then tries to give you something else in a different direction. Okay. It's sort of concierge-like. It's, I guess, the best analogy I would give. If you imagine, like, I always was fascinated as a kid by like the idea of concierges. I mean, when I grew up, I realized it doesn't really exist. But like in movies and stuff like that, you always see like, oh, they call the concierge and they make everything happen.
Right.
And I always had that fascination. I was like, wow, that would be really cool to have. So that was kind of one of our founding things of like, we don't really want to be a task-based voice assistant, or I should say command-based. And in fact, we don't even support certain things like set a timer, set a reminder. And the reason for that is because we fundamentally believe that if you look at the way a person uses the phone, the barrier for us is that, like let's say you use an iPhone, right? You can wake Siri through a hot word or through double tap on the side. There, I just heard my Siri make a sound saying because I said the hot word out loud. Yeah. That's pretty creepy. So I shouldn't say the other A name because I have all the devices around me. So if I talk, they'll hear me. Different problem. But, it's the reason why we didn't take on those tasks is because the phone headset providers make it so hard to get to the user first that we've sort of decided that, okay, if they're going to always have a faster response time for setting that timer, because when I pick up my phone, double tap this thing on the side and say, set a timer for 5 minutes, it can interact with it immediately without unlocking the phone. Because of Apple restrictions, we could never do that. So it's one of those things where I'm hopeful that eventually Apple will have to open up their ecosystem a bit.
Right.
But right now it's like, okay, because Apple is able to get better treatment for their own apps like Siri, we've decided to not compete with them on that functionality and instead focus on more things that you do once you've unlocked the phone. That's kind of our barrier.
Okay. Well, I mean, that makes sense, So with the perfect example of what just happened to you, does Kai have that maybe countermeasure to where, because I can't even say the word go sometimes without my phone being like, I'm sorry, I didn't get that, type thing. So, and it can be very annoying.
We made a pretty conscious decision to not implement what's called keyword spotting in the initial versions of our product, because personally, I feel there's sort of two problems at play. One is that for a lot of these phones, like if you look at the Amazon app, if you want to use their A product, I won't say it because then it'll hear us. It keeps the microphone on. And most people would find it very creepy to have your microphone on while you're browsing Amazon, right?
Yeah.
So it's another one of the scenarios where the manufacturers lock it down.
Mhm.
There's a special chip on most of these devices, like part of the SoC, that controls that keyword spotting. So it operates the microphone at very low power to check if those keywords pop up. And if you notice, like if you have an iPhone now, the top right of the screen is like orange when the microphone is recording as a privacy feature. Some people believe that, myself included perhaps, that maybe the iPhone should be that way 24/7 because it's always listening. And yet for Apple, they don't do that. Everyone else would get that, but not them. And I don't want to claim that it's unfair competition.
Right.
But so it's one of those things where, from a user's perspective, though, if we were to implement that, all they would see is that anytime they have any product that's integrating us open, the microphone is recording. And I think if I just look at the convenience aspect, I'd rather require affirmative consent that they want to be listened to, and maybe make some users frustrated, than risk making some users fearful that we're listening to everything they say.
Right.
It's a very tricky fine line, and I'm hopeful there'll be more capabilities in the devices eventually that are exposed to app creators, because I would love to be able to say, look, when we're looking for the keyword, you're not online. The internet is disconnected. Only once the internet, but no one can trust you right now with that, so why bother?
Yeah. It's that is a very thin line between privacy and maybe when I say it, it sounds ridiculous, but there is a thin line between privacy and convenience.
Oh, it's completely true. I mean, even in fields outside our expertise and domain, we see it all the time with like image recognition.
Mhm.
And I hear about things where it's like office buildings that want to replace the badge entry with just face entry. And everyone's like, oh, this is so great. Everyone can get in like this. And then you think about it deeper and say, well, what is that convenience coming with as a cost?
Right. Yeah.
And it's a hard thing to sort of think about and reason about.
Yeah.
And I think,
it's definitely something that I think it's safe to say the human race has never had to deal with. We really don't know how to feel about it, or it's completely bleak as to where it could lead to. So it's definitely something that needs to be, I'm not going to say dialed back, but let's say for time's sake, strictly monitored maybe is a good way to put it. Like, you got to keep your eye on it, or it will get out of control so fast.
I think the entire AI community of researchers is really struggling with trying to reconcile a lot of how AI should be viewed, as can it have these things like inherent bias, and an example of that that's kind of scary in my mind is like self-driving cars. We talk about all the time about, if you see a scenario where one car is about to get into an accident with another car, and that driver has the option to veer off and hit a pedestrian, but not have a car accident and potentially die, or they could just have the car accident and not hurt the pedestrian.
Right.
And, if you think about AI is dumb. If an AI just knows, like, I should not kill my passenger, it might kill someone else. It's scary, right? Like, if you think about it, and, there's a case in the US recently with like a truck driver where this issue emerged. And it was like a question of like, the truck driver could either like basically commit suicide by driving into the wall, or they would have to go forwards and potentially kill the person in the car in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think AI is going to be a lot of those types of questions in a lot of different places.
Right.
And maybe they won't all be as serious. Hopefully they won't all be as serious as like, do I kill a random person or to save myself? Right. But a lot of the times it will be like, we see this all the time with worries about policing, where it's like, do I risk misidentifying a bunch of people in order to catch that one person? And a lot of things like that. And as researchers, I like to believe that most of us in the field are not inherently, biased or evil.
Right.
we're just sort of like struggling with the fact that humans haven't solved it for themselves, how to navigate the ethics. So how can we have an AI somehow be more ethical when we don't know what those ethics look like?
Right, exactly. That's a very good point. That is an incredibly good point. You know, and you know, maybe that's the key. Like maybe we as humans, you know, as advanced as we are, we're still relatively primitive. You know, so maybe it would take AI to be like, hello, this is the right. I mean, like, oh shoot,
Yeah,
you're right. You know? Yeah. It's like this. It's so simple once someone shows you how to do it, or something perhaps. So yeah, but
I mean, we don't know.
yeah, right. But back to MeetKai, because I'm really curious about this whole metaverse thing. I feel like it.
Yes.
I know it's been around, but I read an article that you were quoted in, and I want some clarification. And you know, who better to ask than you? So when you said, with our conversational AI, we can enable experiences that would otherwise be unreachable or exclusive, end quote. Yeah. And that MeetKai will be the key to the metaverse. What exactly did you mean by that?
Sure. So starting with sort of how we see the metaverse and sort of why we're jumping in, it's actually been a project that we've been working on for about 7 or 8 months now. When we started looking at the metaverse, really just as like, you know, people weren't calling it the metaverse back then. That branding kind of picked up in the past few months, but it was sort of this idea of like, we have conversational technology. What other like deployments are possible for conversational technology? And, you know, to be honest with you, we're looking at other deployments as well right now. We just haven't talked about them, but, you know, we're looking at things like coffee shops where you might want to place your orders through conversation, stuff like that, where it's like, okay, conversation has a lot of applications because we as humans use conversation most of our lives, not iPads. So for us in the metaverse, our goal basically is there's a lot of companies out there working on the space, but almost entirely what they're all working on is this like person to person metaverse, where, you know, and they're calling it the metaverse, but in some ways it's kind of like a MMO, like a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. Like Second Life has existed for years. There was The Sims Online, and there's all these games where you'd go in and you'd be with other people. For us, on the other hand, what we're looking at it as is a lot of the things that we do in life aren't always social experiences from the beginning. You know, you might go to a store, and that's an experience that you have with the store. You don't really want to have 100 people around you at the store too. If you did, you'd say, I hate this. The museum, another example, or like a gallery, you go there to have an experience with the art, maybe the guide or curator, not necessarily 1,000 other people in the same room as you. And our idea is basically what conversational AI and the metaverse enables is to create these types of spaces where you can have a personal experience, and around, like, let's say a gallery tour, a boxing instruction, where you know, when I was saying like make it that are cost prohibitive right now, it's not everyone or almost no one in the world can get one-on-one boxing training from like a world champion,
right?
Who could afford that? And even if you could afford it, who could get access to a boxing champion that wants to train them at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night?
Right.
In their living room.
Jake Paul, I think, is the only one that can do that.
Yes, but everyone else, unless you are a world boxing champion too as well. You train yourself, but it's just one of those things where both access and cost make it impossible. And what we can do with our technology is work towards providing that idea of like an AI boxing coach that has a boxing gym in the metaverse that you can go to and get that training from him or her. And, you know, we're looking at those types of experiences, and that's really our goal, is look at the world from the perspective of what are the things that we do that aren't necessarily social. And I think that also helps us a lot because it avoids a lot of the problems that exist within that purely social world of like the chat apps.
Right. Well, thank you very much for the explanation. I completely get, you know, when you said unreachable or exclusive, I hadn't really thought too deep into it because I knew I was going to be talking to you, so I didn't really have to. But But yeah, you're absolutely right. And obviously, the AI has, unlimited capacity for knowledge. So a boxing coach, honestly, and this is no disrespect to any legendary boxing coach, but I would imagine a finely tuned AI could probably coach you a little better than
Yeah.
someone that's been around since the 50s.
Well, I mean, the coolest thing in my mind is that it's your boxing coach. If you think about like a boxing coach at a gym, let's say you're getting let's say somehow you can afford to have 1 hour of boxing from one of the greatest boxers currently in the world every day. That person maybe is doing 10 other people.
Right.
What they're doing is some sort of generic, like, oh, get started with boxing. They don't remember necessarily what you did last time.
Right.
They don't grow with you. They don't understand, like, oh, you're having a hard time doing jabs. Let's work more on jabs, and ask them the next time they come, how are your jabs going? So it's like, it's our goal is to like leverage the fact that AI can remember things perfectly, whereas people cannot, and people cannot adjust instantly.
Right. And you made a great point. It's something I feel like, me personally, I've never considered. Like you said, you have these online games, but I feel like you guys have definitely entered into a niche that a lot of people will be drawn to, because I think people that are drawn to the metaverse, or whatever you want to call it, that virtual space, may have trouble in society, or just speaking in general. I know I have trouble with things, and I'm sure most other people do. But to actually be able to escape society for any amount of time, an hour, a day, or whatever, you don't really want society coming into that space, right? Because then it's just pointless. Like, now I have to look at this digitally animated jerk and not the real one that I dealt with earlier today.
Exactly.
So I think you guys have really kind of, fine tune is a good word. I don't know. It's, you really hit an area that needs to be open.
I think if you look at sort of like video games, right? A lot of people like playing online games. A lot of people also like playing single player and co-op games. And the social experiences we want to do are closer to like co-op, where it's just like you and your friends, like,
Right.
Your small group of friends that you trust are going on a museum tour, or taking a boxing class with you. Not like you and 400 other people are all in the museum at the same time, jumping on top of, like, every time I think of the metaverse, it's like, I think of, like, I remember when I played Second Life, and it was like people are jumping on top of each other and flying around, and it's like some dude in a giant costume is like throwing stuff at you, and it's like, oh God, this is even worse than real life because there's no repercussions.
That is 100% true, and it's a great segue. Actually, I want to ask you a hot topic question. And feel free to give your opinion if you want or not. I will call this, because I'm 100% for this virtual space in moderation, obviously. But as devil's advocate, I would like to say, I read an article today, and according to the Center for Countering Digital Hate, a violating act, be it of sexual nature or verbal, or any type of something that may make someone feel uncomfortable, occurs about once every 7 minutes in one particular VR game. So how do you feel about the concerns of inappropriate behavior and possibly the long-term mental anguish from those that become victims within these virtual worlds?
So I think it's a real problem. And, it's, if you talk to the companies that are making the devices, one of them in particular that don't need to mention, but, we talk to them a lot, calls it like their integrity team, where it's like, and it's a very vague word because it's like, oh God, that covers everything. And that's not that helpful. Yeah. And I think the concern in my mind is we've seen as an entire human race how poorly moderation has done in the past, I don't know, we'll call it 5 years in particular, where on social media, things could never be moderated. And if you think about like the metaverse, it's like, okay, it's even worse because now there's this physical and presence element. That's sort of one of the big motivations for us to not try to go down the social route as well as a Me Too social space, because I think it's like fundamentally such a problem when there is no repercussion. And the example of that the most, and this has always been a problem, you know, I'm a gamer. I've always played games since I was a kid. And, you know, one of the things that I always remembered is like one of the big differences between games that are free to play and games that require a high upfront cost is that the high upfront games, people behave much nicer because if they're banned, they lose their money.
Right.
If you can just keep making new accounts and keep having new identities, how are you going to stop that? Because it's like I'm saying, right? Like real life, you know that if you do something like that, it sticks to you. You could be punished. Maybe you will, maybe you won't, but it still sticks to you. People know it was you, and you could lose your job. Your family could hate you. All these sorts of things, even beyond just purely legal repercussions. In a virtual world where you are just an avatar with no value to it, and you can keep making new ones, there's no repercussion possible. So I think it pretty much leads to my core thesis, which is that until people place as much value on their avatars in the metaverse, there's never going to be a way, no matter how good your banning or moderation or anything else like that is, to prevent people that are really, really, really rotten apples from just creating new accounts over and over. So that's sort of why our goal is to stick to the idea of these personal person to AI experiences, where the only people in the world with you are necessarily people who you trust. The places exist for multiple people. And not to use too many analogies of video games, but it's kind of like a dungeon in a lot of games where a lot of people can enter the dungeon with their own parties, and they each have their own experience there. But it's not like you and 150 other people from 12 different countries are in there with you at the same time.
Right.
And I think it's really tricky because if anything, I would say that Facebook has the best chance right now because your Facebook account is required for the Quest. And I know a lot of people are really upset about that, saying, oh, I don't want to associate my Facebook account with my Quest account and play video games. And there's lots of reasons for that. And I think one of the reasons why they forced it through, though, is not purely out of just wanting the data, but also that hoping that people will be worried about getting their Facebook banned. And it's like Gmail is a good example, too, of this. I know I'm veering off, but why do most people not send a bunch of spam from their Gmail? Because they don't want their Google account to be banned. Right. So they don't send threatening or harassing emails from their Gmail. Because they have to be like, oh, okay, if my Gmail's banned, then I lose my YouTube account. Maybe my Android account stops working. All these terrible things. Same with Apple. Right. So you have this fear in you of losing something of value. And most of the companies right now that are providing metaverse experiences, they're all the same problem as those free games where you get banned, just make a new account. And it's like, even if the technology gets so good that, let's say, they can ban you immediately after you say something, the other person still heard it.
True.
They've already taken the hit, and you can just make a new account and then say it again. And there's never going to be a technology that allows it to predict when you're going to do something hateful and stop you from saying it.
You know, obviously hate speech and, cyberbullying or, any of that is completely, it's just abhorrent. Like, it's just the worst, absolutely. But also, you walk down the street, who's to say someone is not going to run up in your face and call you a name, like that's kind of part of being in a social situation. It's not always fantastic, but like you said, the problem in the virtual world compared to, the real life is the threat of repercussions are very low. Physically, no one's going to punch you in the mouth in, the metaverse. Well, maybe they do, but obviously you're not.
But who cares?
Yeah, but who cares? Yeah. yeah, it's something, it's but I mean, I would liken it to, the excessive amounts of cyberbullying that we witnessed, in the early stages of the internet and chat rooms and things. Like, it was completely ridiculous.
Oh, I remember AIM on AOL, the chat rooms where it was just harassment nonstop.
It was complete madness. It was like, it was almost apocalyptic, even though it was, future. It was very crazy. And I imagine that the metaverse, being as new as it is, and or finally gaining popularity, I would imagine it's probably going to be the same thing, until things start happening, and Facebook and yourself as well, and these other companies start to really weed out these bad eggs. But what can you do until it happens? Really, it's too late.
I mean, it's fundamentally one of those things where, like, Reddit is one of the companies that's struggling the most with this right now, because to make a Reddit account, you only need to make a username and password. Mm-hmm. You don't need a phone number. And like, you look at all these other social networks that started out a lot lower friction, and like WhatsApp, for example, used to be so low friction to get going. Now WhatsApp is like, it's one of those things where I think that a lot of the things that people think Facebook is being privacy invasive about, they're doing out of a sort of necessity / desperation for controlling this problem of like a return to the beginning of the web.
Right.
And YouTube removing dislikes, and like all these companies are struggling with different ways to counteract the simple fact that if you have a group of people and 100 of them are great and one of them is bad, then that one bad person is going to ruin it for way more people than 100 good people make it good for. Right. Because it's just like real life. Someone that commits a crime can devastate a community. And no matter how much good the other community is doing. And as you say, 7 minutes in the metaverse, that's not much adoption right now. If we assume that it's going to be 100 times more adoption in the future, or 1,000 times, like, oh God, are we going to start saying that every 4 seconds someone is sexually assaulted in the metaverse?
Yeah.
And you can just see that ad.
Yeah, that's definitely a statistic. Definitely a statistic that will be, broadcast across whatever. But okay, kind of move away from that. It's a little bit of a dark. Sure. I'm very curious. I'm well, I'm not going to say relatively. I am considerably ignorant when it comes to NFTs. However, I also see an opportunity in the metaverse for these non-fungible tokens to actually have almost a feeling, right now it's purely digital. I buy something, I can't hold it, I can't like look at it like that, like you would imagine a piece of art, contemporary piece of art. However, I feel that the metaverse may be what NFTs need.
So I think if you look at the successful applications of NFTs or things where I believe there is promise, I think that purely on an aesthetic thing of like saying that like, this is my avatar. Right. Like I bought this for, the numbers are getting ridiculous. So someone will say something like, I bought it for $11,000 or some crazy amount. We're like, really? You did that? And when they buy it, they don't own the copyright or anything to it. Anyone can just save the image and re-upload it and say, I now own this avatar too. Mm-hmm. What it does do is prove lineage and prove that it was you're able to prove, because it's non-fungible, that you bought that specific item. And I think that there's a huge potential. Right now, I think the most success that we're seeing with NFTs, and what I believe will be even more successful, is the idea of like, why do people buy a Gucci belt right now? Partly because they want to have the aesthetics of the look, but also there's the entire brand of saying, oh, I own a Gucci belt. This is my Gucci belt. And what NFTs allow in the metaverse is the idea of like Gucci could be the one selling the NFTs for the belts. And you'd be able to say, I have a real Gucci belt. Mm-hmm. And Gucci, and because of the NFT, it's verified that it came from Gucci. Maybe it was sold a few times, but then it's yours. Versus right now, if you go out to a store and buy a belt, you have no idea if it came from Gucci or it came from some factory somewhere else in the world. That's true. Where it's like a completely random thing. Right. So it's NFTs have that potential of lineage. And we're actually looking at them right now for two things. One of them is that idea of the items for your avatar, where you're able to buy limited edition items or sort of like owned items for your character. And the goal with NFTs there, and it's going to take an incredible amount of time to figure out how this works between platforms, is that your avatar should be able to have clothing that can move around in different worlds. Whether you're in our metaverse experience or Facebook's or anyone else's, your character should be able to have the same outfit and prove that it's moving with them.
Right, right.
So that's one potential. The other place where we're looking at that I think is even more fun is for the land itself. And the idea there is that if you look at the metaverse as a reflection of reality in some ways, and like how does land ownership work in the real world? It's very, very dirty, because I don't know if it's dirty, but it's like inelegant because it has a lot of government rules, a deed to the land, contracts. It's very unclear and hard to say if it's like your place.
Right.
So I think it's land, on the other hand, if you can say that like by buying the NFT and whoever holds this NFT, it's like the true deed to this land. And I can build whatever I want in the metaverse with my true deed.
Oh, that's so interesting. That just brought like a flood of questions into my mind.
Oh, please.
Yeah, well, like, that would obviously open the door for, virtual real estate agents.
Exactly.
You would have all of this, just the possible. Well, I mean, it's like, I'm not gonna say it's like real life. It's better than real life because the possibilities are legitimately endless.
Yes, it's
so interesting, dude. So interesting.
I think it's scary because like as a platform creator of things, we want to like, of course, you want to retain control and all that. But I think the idea of being able to say like, you own this land, we cannot take it back from you. It's now yours. And there's maybe ideas about like, okay, just like in real life, land goes up in value. Other things around you get more valuable. They become a better like also go down in value. So there's like it's NFTs. I think that's where they'll shine. Not necessarily for just like, as some people say, pixels, but the idea of like true ownership, like that's in my mind the beauty of it, because nowhere else really is there this idea of being able to prove ownership in a very clear way for anything. I mean, if you told asked the government for like really clear ownership of your plot of land, they'd be like, well, you have a deed, don't you? But anyone can print out a deed. And it's like, well, is your deed registered with the county? It's people who, I remember as a kid, I didn't understand how land ownership worked in the US. I just thought that someone, because I mean, who knows? Then it's unclean. And it's one of those things where society gets in the way.
Right.
And the metaverse, on the other hand, if we're creating a new, I want to call it new reality, an alternative reality, whatever you want to call it, land will be a key element, and NFTs are likely going to be how that's transacted. Maybe it's not NFTs. Maybe there's going to be something a little more advanced.
Right.
But it's the pathway.
Yeah. It's super interesting, and I agree 100% with the notion. As a child, it's like you don't really. I remember I'm from rural Kentucky, actually. If my accent didn't give it away, but I remember as a young man, 10, 11 years old or something, going with my grandfather. He had like a tract of land on this mountainside or something, and he would have to go every. I went with him maybe 4 or 5 times, but he would have to go and make sure that the person that owned the land next to him has not moved the goalpost. Like they're moving his. So we would have to go and like measure because they would try to like inch it over. A couple inches, and then but it was very it's a very dirty. I think dirty is it's a pretty good way to put it. It's just it's not clean at all. But I think in the metaverse, that is so exciting to think about. You own a piece of virtual reality, like it's yours.
Yeah. And you can sell it. Is probably one of my favorite elements of it.
Right.
It's because plenty of games have had the idea of like owning items in the past, but you couldn't sell it. It's still just a little, numbers in a database. With an NFT, it's numbers in a database, but you can give it to someone else. They can give you money in exchange.
Yeah. It's definitely something to look forward to. And I'm brainstorming on like, what's the best way to be like a real estate company? You know what I'm saying? Like I will be the mediator or moderator or whatever it needs to be between, selling these properties.
I think it's going to be great. I think it's going to be great. Like it's going to be broken at first, but at least there's this idea of like, okay, I don't think anyone in real life would say that the way real estate agents and all that kind of stuff works right now is optimal. Right. Maybe no one can think of anything much better, but no one who's dealt with a real estate agent before is like, this is great. Every experience in real life should be like this. I wish I could have an agent for my haircut.
Yeah.
It's like cars are another example of like, no one who buys a used car enjoys buying a used car, the experience of it.
Right.
And if you think about how many car companies have popped up in the past few years that try to make it easier to buy cars because people don't like going to dealerships. It's like NFTs would enable that as well in some ways with items in the metaverse, because it's like, it's just, I think there's potential. It's going to take a long time to get there, but there's a lot of potential that a lot of people would say is very untapped at the moment.
Yeah, it's definitely exciting. And, I feel extremely lucky. I'm sure, people when, the cars were first rolling around, I'm sure they was like, oh, this is an amazing time we're living in. But I feel like this is absolutely the most amazing time to be living in.
So far. Hopefully it doesn't become the Matrix and all that, but let's hope and let's be optimistic, because I think most people would say that social media used to be better than it is now. I personally feel that way. Maybe it's just nostalgia, but I feel like there's this nice sweet spot of before things really went unhinged. And then, if you go back further before like AIM, and like you just look back when it was purely just like emails and web directories, It's like so quaint because people were treating it like writing letters. And it's like things go through bright spots, and I'm hopeful that we'll get past this dark spot that it is in right now with the metaverse and into that kind of good sweet spot of like, okay, this is pretty fun.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess you could basically relate it to, growing pains. Like it's just,
yes,
this stuff is not going to be nice at first. That's just the way it is. I'm sure starting MeetKai and that whole thing, it hasn't been, a walk in the park at all.
Never is. Each day it's more problems.
Right. But, there is a vision. And, speaking of, actually, this is a great way to end another fantastic segment. I feel super lucky today. That's 2 in a row. So what is next for MeetKai?
Sure. So our metaverse play, the angle that we're going for is we really want to make it accessible on every platform, not just VR, because VR is still too cost prohibitive. Where right now, $300 is almost at a decent spot for the US, but it's not the case for the rest of the world, right? Obviously.
Right.
So we're looking into ways of providing our experience in other types of platforms as well, whether it's on mobile or whether it's on desktop or computer browser. And we're just trying to get the friction down. And we're investing pretty heavily in the ecosystem around that of, we really want our product to be as easy as clicking a link, where if I sent you a link, you just click the link and you're already there in the world, in the store, in the museum, in the boxing gallery, boxing gym. And that's sort of what we're working on right now, is that, we have sort of proof of concepts that function and work, but they still require a VR headset and a large download of like, our museum gallery is like 900 megabytes. So it's like, it's an entire experience of downloading the app, waiting for the app to download. So we're working very heavily on making our experience really, really instant accessible. And that's sort of what we're targeting as much as possible in the next quarter, in this quarter, is, we originally were planning on doing a beta in the early spring that was on Oculus, but then we decided like it's only going to get us a little narrow subset of people.
Right.
So we're looking at, maybe we're adjusting our roadmap right now to kind of have that multi-platform support. And like, to be honest, it's like the metaverse has existed in some ways for a long time, because the entire web is like a metaverse, right? There's all these different sites that you go to, you click links on your browser. It just doesn't feel like a metaverse because it's just, I don't know, 3D, whatever you want to call it. So we're trying to look on that path and figure out how can we replicate that instant access of, if you type, techtimes.com in your browser, you're already there. Right. You don't need to download an app on your phone, wait for it to install, create an account, create an avatar, and then you're there. Like, who would want to do that?
Right.
But it should be as easy to like click the link and be in the metaverse for it, be in the office for Tech Times, so you can look around, talk to people, talk to a reporter, whatever, what have you, without having to download all these applications. Okay. And it's possible. The tech is out there, and it's just a matter of, right now it's kind of in an awkward position because a lot of the companies that were stewarding sort of that open movement aren't anymore, because they're going a little bit closed. I think you can probably guess the company I'm thinking of that has a colorful name and has been really good at search for a number of years.
Yeah,
and also has a web browser.
It became a verb. Yeah.
Yes. They have a web browser that pretty much is the only browser right now.
Right.
So there's some concern that the web will become less open, but we're trying to figure out ways to ensure that doesn't happen, because I still firmly do believe the browser is the most open platform right now. We've seen this with all these lawsuits that have been happening all over the world about the app stores and lockdown platforms, and I don't think anyone wants the metaverse to be another lockdown platform.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good stuff. Hopefully, it'll be one day, all of that will be just as quick, like you said, just as quick as clicking a link. That would be, I think, ideal for most users, for sure.
Yeah, and we have demos that are mostly working now. It's just a matter of like, by existing in the browser, performance becomes harder. So those things become trickier.
Well, okay, James, we are unfortunately out of time for today, but it was great. It's super interesting conversation. Probably one of the best I've had, honestly. It's
thank you. It was very fun talking to you this morning.
Yeah, it's a fantastic concept. It's a fantastic idea. It's a fantastic, probably, I think it would be fair to call it a movement. We're moving in that direction for sure. And, I'm excited to follow you guys and see how everything works out and possibly be part of it one day.
That's what we're hoping. Hopefully we'll have this. I mean, sometimes I end these by saying, hopefully we'll have this conversation next time in the metaverse. Who knows if we will, but it's a fun way to sign off, right?
It is. Yeah, I can't think of a better way. Yeah. See you in the metaverse. Yeah. Right? All right, James. Thanks, man.
Of course. Thank you.